Yay! I love this intimate crew. Thanks for being with us. We are up here because we all have known each other for a while, and we've talked over the years in our own journeys about when we feel like an imposter, or when we're finding ourselves facing this new space and we're suddenly wondering, wait, do I belong? And so I want to start off just by saying, you all belong here, including those folks who are online with us right now. This is a conversation for everyone. This isn't just a conversation for people who are actively feeling this. It's also not just a conversation for leaders. It's also a conversation for folks who might be like students or new to the world of working, and it affects everyone. And we're excited to have this be a little bit of a conversation, and I know this will be an intimate conversation. We want, because there's a lot of experience in the room. So we do want to start out by asking, like, does this resonate? Has anybody felt this where you distrust your own success or you question whether you belong? Okay, yeah. So super. It's a super common experience, but it's also a really isolating experience because when you're going through it, you are feeling so alone. Let's do our quick intros. My name is Caitlin Rogers. Again, I'm the Chief Storytelling Officer of Next Day Animations. We're an explainer animation studio. We started 10 years ago, and I remember a time maybe 8 years ago when I was at a meetup for entrepreneurs. I still didn't even feel comfortable saying the word entrepreneur because it felt like that title applied to somebody else, right? And I remember showing up in this room, and we went around and did our introductions, and I was the only woman in the room, and when it got to me, I said, "Hi, my name is Caitlin Rogers." I said it like in a really low, loud way because I think I was trying to convince myself that I belonged. I was trying to like assert that I really belonged in the room. But it took me years to kind of get past this space where I was like comfortable saying what I did, but believing it, even though it was what I was actually doing. But I didn't feel like I was making it up.
Thank you. My name is Teresa Schneider, and I am the president and co-founder of the Gentleman's Gazette. We make classic men's accessories, and we have a large and active YouTube channel. So if there's any YouTubers out there, go like and subscribe. But I have a very similar story to Caitlin. I'm a co-founder as well, and the subject of our business happens to be my husband's passion, and he's the face of our YouTube channel. So I've always struggled to say that I too am a founder, that I too am an entrepreneur. And so imposter syndrome has been a companion of mine since I was a teenager.
And I'm Caroline Carrancha, CEO at Hack the Gap. And this is definitely something that I have continued to figure out over the last couple of years. But so Hack the Gap is all about increasing gender diversity in tech. And every single time we do events, we either get DMs or messages, people tag us saying, "Hey, I'm not really sure if I would consider myself a techie." And then sometimes you look at their titles and it says software engineer, right? And so I think like one of the things that I was really happy to be part of this panel is to share out like, this is something that we consistently see on an ongoing basis. And so I think it's important to really understand some of the roots of that.
And so today we're going to be doing a little bit of like discussing with the people near us. So maybe we can just take a quick moment. If you're virtual right now and you want to just chat like, "Hey, I'm here," but maybe just take one quick moment to like talk to somebody sitting near you and just explain like who you are and why you're here today. Because what we're going to be talking about is individual work, but also it's group work, and it's going to have to do with relationships and communities. So take a quick 30 seconds to say hi. Yeah, I did see it. Maybe I think it's down there. Maybe they're chat. So if you're online or if you're here in person, if you also want to start answering this question with the person you're talking to, what is the impact of feeling like we don't belong? What's the impact on us as individuals, and what's the impact on our teams or our organizations? You can discuss amongst yourselves first. Oh, is the question up on the screen? What's the impact of feeling like you don't belong, either as individuals or for teams? Oh, yeah. No, that's great. You are following direction. That's great. We're saying you can discuss this question. What's the impact?
Keep the clicker in my section. Yeah, do it for you. Just because I have paper in my hands, I have a clicker. Yeah, totally.
So I know that the folks who are online can talk to each other about the impact, but and we might have somebody who can read off if any contributions. But are there any comments? Oh yeah, do you? Okay. Okay, great. Okay, awesome. Does anybody want to share like what you talked about? What's the impact?
Now I changed my mind. I have an imposter syndrome about speaking out. No, so I was just saying that when I don't feel like I belong, I don't voice my opinions. I feel small, and my voice, I feel like it doesn't matter, even though in my head I know it does.
I mean, what I was going to say is just very similar to that. When you don't feel like you belong, I would say even further than your voice, your contribution doesn't feel like it's welcomed. And for me personally, that allows my wheels to spin in the mud. No sense of momentum or development happens as a result of that.
I think when you don't feel like you belong, you choose to basically not sit at the table. You sit back, and so then it's perpetual. It's a downward spiral. The more you feel like you don't belong, the more you actually don't, because you act like you don't belong, and then people will treat you like you don't belong, and it just keeps continuing.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, one for virtual.
Yes. They said I hesitate to take new opportunities as they come because I don't feel qualified.
Absolutely. So we can hear, throughout these answers, it's the individual feeling, right? You're dealing with this as an individual, questioning yourself, holding yourself back from progress or growth, these growth opportunities. But also as organizations, this is absolutely affecting what's happening in the room and what's happening with our teams when people aren't able to confidently show up and speak up and feel like they belong in the room. So.
Keep that for me. All right, so now that we've warmed up a little bit, started talking about the impacts this kind of feeling has on us, we want to just share a brief history of imposter syndrome with you. And it really harkens back to this 1978 study, the imposter phenomenon of high-achieving women. So despite outstanding academic and professional achievements, they persist in believing they are really not bright and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. Numerous achievements, which one might expect to provide ample objective evidence of superior intellectual functioning, do not appear to affect the imposter belief. So beyond that formal language, this study just really shows how consistently women feel that they don't belong in their workplaces, despite evidence to the contrary, and it frames it as their fault. Does this picture bring any feelings? Exactly. So this article that we are going to be using as the basis for this definition very much does talk about women. There are many, many people who experience imposter syndrome, but in this case, we use this example from around the same time of that study in 1975. The Board of Trustees of the Washington Post, just to show, who is in the room, who isn't in the room. How did they get there? To ask those kind of questions, to provide that kind of context for, this study at the time.
And what on earth could possibly happen in this picture that would make a high-achieving woman? I'm not saying that Katharine Graham, that she's the CEO of the Washington Post, she was.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that she has imposter syndrome, but what on earth was going on in the 70s that might have made high-achieving women feel like they don't belong? It's a mystery, right? We'll never know.
Right. So our world has changed. It's 45 years later, but the narrative of imposter syndrome hasn't changed. Until recently, this really fantastic article came out. Has anybody here read this from Harvard Business Review? Okay, and it says, stop telling women they have imposter syndrome. So the authors argue that it's really a false narrative. It pushes responsibility for the feelings of being imposter back on that person. But they also start with a quick look into the name itself, imposter and syndrome. And imposter really has this criminal type aspect feeling to it, and syndrome really has that hint of female hysteria, right, from decades past. So this word is truly weighty in its effect. And although feelings of uncertainty are really expected and a normal part of professional life, women who experience them are deemed to suffer from imposter syndrome. Even if women demonstrate strength and ambition and resilience, our daily battles with microaggressions in the workplace tend to pull us down. Now, this imposter syndrome took a fairly universal feeling of discomfort and second guessing and mild anxiety in the workplace and pathologized it. So they continue in this article to say that imposter syndrome puts the blame on individuals without accounting for the historical and the cultural context in which they're in. And as white men progress in their fields, their feelings of doubt usually lessen over time as they find role models, as their work is validated. And they rarely, if ever, experience questioning about their leadership style or their competence or their contributions in the workplace. But women experience the opposite, and it puts the onus on them to fix this issue, to deal with the effects. So the world implicitly, if not explicitly, says we don't belong in male and white dominated workplaces. Now, it's also important to note, too, that the original study from this was done in the 1970s, and it was just on women, but more recent studies have been done over much broader populations, and it shows that men are equally as likely to experience imposter syndrome, especially ones that don't fit the strong, assertive stereotype. So if you're able to express self-doubt as a man, you oftentimes also feel the effects of imposter syndrome. So it's not just per se for women. So in truth, we don't belong because we were never supposed to belong. The current model is Eurocentric and masculine and heteronormative. So the answer to this is not how do we fix ourselves, but how do we fix the culture that we exist in. And we have to explore this on two different levels. One is on an individual level, so how do we cope with this? Even though it's not necessarily our responsibility, it's still something we have to cope with. And then from an organizational level, how can we change to start relieving some of the pressure that this creates?
I have a mic. So I'll be talking a little bit about the individual perspective, and I know it's like two sides of a coin, right? Because it's like maybe you're here because you're like, I'm really feeling this, and we're like, no, it's not real. But the impacts are still real, even if it's not your fault that you are doubting yourself. So we're going to talk a little bit about the individual strategies for getting past self-doubt, but we also are going to make sure we really focus on the other side of the coin, which is organizationally and culturally, like Teresa said, so which Caroline will be talking about. But as individuals, how do we ground ourselves in self-worth? I do want to ask, what has worked for folks who said that they have experienced this? Do you have specific things you've done in the past or advice you would give somebody else who is going through this? And do we have the mic again? Thanks.
I think one thing that I can constantly turn to is in the moments where I've experienced that self-doubt, because for me, imposter syndrome is kind of like, we all just want to make a bigger impact, right? Like we want to serve our communities, we want to be helpful, we want to be caring. And for me, imposter syndrome is kind of like this back voice is like, oh yeah, am I being helpful enough? You know, am I contributing enough? Am I caring enough? And so there's like this caring gesture. But in those moments of that questioning, I just ask myself, well, yeah, but where is the evidence? The evidence of like the success that I have created or the evidence of the impact that I am making. And I just take a second and give myself some, pardon my French, but some fucking credit, you know? Like actually, when was the last time we sat down and just like gave ourselves real credit for the things we've already done? I think celebrating ourselves is something that is downright missing in our culture. And so that's something that I engage in.
I love that.
One of the things that I do, you asked about what tactics I use. I force myself, even when uncomfortable, when I'm going to a session, that I'm going to ask a question. I challenge myself that I will ask a question. And now I've been doing that for a couple of years, and here I am with the microphone twice already, so you can all do it. But the other thing I do is when I go into the boardroom that looks like that, I sit at the table, always sit at the table. I never sit in the second row. And then if the head of the table is open, I just sit there. Unless that's the chair's spot, of course, but right, so, and nobody's ever kicked me out yet, so go for it.
So I try one that's a little bit more physical, and this was a tactic that I was taught, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it, but it's really literally doing a victory pose, the power pose. They see it in the wild. It's, you know, it's proven from how we can kind of get making our brain work, and it's, you know, just standing up and doing this. It might be like this, it might be like this, right? There's lots of different power poses, but I'm kinesthetic also, and so I think literally changing your body and changing your space, that's been helpful for me as well.
I love that, absolutely. We had a couple other thoughts because we have, you know, been discussing this and what has been working for us. We'd like to add finding your people. So in the last session, they were talking about sponsors and mentors, right? So it's finding the people who are going to go to bat for you and advocate for you. It's also finding the people, maybe your peers, who can just see you and value you and hear you and validate your experience, help you process and understand the dynamics of what might be going on, to have that external reflection. Also finding your people might not just be individual people, it might be finding your organizations and finding spaces where you feel seen and recognized and like you can thrive. So it might be looking around and realizing maybe this isn't quite the right space for me right now. Maybe there's somewhere else that I might be more valued. Another one, confidence cues, which the power poses like totally come into place. Also, any athletes or former athletes in here? I know in athletics, confidence cues like music, right? A certain music, maybe a picture, something that inspires you, maybe clothes. Maybe it's your power shirt that makes you feel awesome when you're wearing that shirt or whatever it is for you. It's finding what are those physical ways you can surround yourself with reminders of your own self-worth. Maybe listening. I won't say the music that we talked about earlier, but
Power leopard for me.
What'd you say?
Power leopard.
Oh yeah, your powered leopard. Yes. Okay, this is a fun one that it sounds silly, but I swear it works, and many people have said it works. Sometimes I help friends and other people negotiate salaries. And it's really a scary space of like, what am I doing? What if they take the job away? And to get over that fear, doing this awesomeness exercise, it takes half an hour. You need a piece of paper and a pen, and you just sit down and you start writing down why you are awesome. So things you are good at, compliments you've ever received. And it's hard, right? Because you might start out and you're like 4 down and you're like, okay, I don't know where to go from here, right? But you force yourself to continue filling out that piece of paper, and you dig deep, and you have to start grounding and believing yourself and really, really centering, like, why am I awesome? And all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I just filled out a whole piece of paper. Then you take that piece of paper and you tape it up behind your laptop so that whenever you have that big meeting or presentation or whatever it is, you just have that space where you're like, oh yes, I've connected to knowing why I am awesome, which leads to another great written exercise.
Yes, something else you could do is success journaling. So this could be an actual journal that you keep, near like your bed or place of work or whatever. And maybe every day or once a week, even if it's bullet points, you just keep track of these are the really awesome things that I did. Here's the amazing projects that I've been a part of and how I contributed to it. So then that way, a month from then or a year from then, when you're doing your reviews, you have a little list to go through and say, this is why I'm awesome, why I deserve a raise, or why I should be part of this team. And just having in your own voice in real time something you can go back to and see that evidence, back to the evidence base, is really key. All right, so we've talked a lot about, as individuals, how we might be able to cope with imposter syndrome. But of course, as we mentioned, this is about creating cultures that, that don't facilitate this, right? And so how can organizations change, and what can organizations do in order to help with this? So the first thing you could do, of course, is facilitate a supportive workplace culture. And so that means creating a way for people to be able to kind of share in what some of those experiences are, keeping an eye out for the various things that may amplify feelings of imposter syndrome. So even thinking about, if you walk into a room and it's sort of the same meeting all the time, are certain people always sitting at certain places? Like, how can you switch those up? So kind of keeping an eye out for little cues here and there that are going to kind of facilitate that ongoing feeling. The other thing as well, too, is anytime you're thinking about changes to your workplace culture, you always want to have some kind of measures of growth or progress. And so that means having something that is a little bit data-driven, incorporated into whatever initiative that you're putting together. So then that way you can see whether or not you're going generally towards the direction that you want to go to or not. The other thing, of course, is understanding and mitigating bias. We know that bias can amplify these feelings of imposter syndrome. The panel earlier talked a lot about the impact that this has on workplace culture. And so a lot of this means that you have to really, again, be aware of cues of implicit and explicit bias that are happening within the workplace, and putting together initiatives and work action plans in order to help address those. And then another piece, of course, is having a way for people to provide feedback. And this is more than just that yearly survey about how employees are feeling. Sometimes I notice the survey comes out right before Christmas, right before bonuses, which seems a little unfair. But you really kind of want to have something or a space for people to yearly kind of throughout be able to share that feedback. It might be a suggestion box. It might be having sort of a office hours that HR hosts, or a third party comes in, consultant hosts those office hours. So that way you can have sort of an ongoing stream of feedback and opportunities to continue to adjust and make changes to your workplace culture, and really understand, again, more real time what is happening within your workplace, and having those multiple ways for people to express that feedback as well. And then as an individual leader within your organizations, here are some things to consider as well. One is to just have a space to learn, listen, and create spaces to educate other people, or for your peers to educate each other. This is really key. So as a leader, you can help facilitate that space, and really taking that on and ensuring that that is something that is available and accessible is a key thing that a leader can do. The other piece as well, we talked about, mentors and sponsors. That was mentioned earlier. Caitlin mentioned it as well. You want to make sure that you're using your voice to create a space for other people to amplify their own voices. And so just paying attention, again, to small cues here and there, and making sure that folks are able to be recognized for their work and their contributions, and highlighting that, so then that way they can see how they're fitting into your team and into your organization. And something else I'll say, when we started, folks were talking about the impact that imposter syndrome has on their ability to contribute to their teams. Now, if you can take that the other way around and have a space where you are constantly telling people, here are the awesome things that you are bringing to the table, or so-and-so is contributing to this project, I would imagine that that would have really the opposite effect, right, that imposter syndrome does, which is someone's like, oh, I can see how I fit into this team. I can see the contribution I'm making, and even more excited to continue to do that. So this is going to kind of repay itself in many other ways. And then the last piece I'd say is every single organization has its own unique culture. There are things that really jive really well within your said organization. Some organizations are really into humor and memes and stuff like that. Some organizations are big on data or big on visuals or fun design. So think about what are some of the tools or key fun quirks within your organization that you can use then as tools for conversations to address and talk about imposter syndrome, and to incorporate all of these initiatives to potentially create more positive change use those tools to then create more positive change within your organization. So kind of leverage what's already working really well within your org in order to address this. Are there other things that you all are thinking about that maybe we didn't mention?
I apologize, I missed a little bit earlier, but as you're looking through these things from a company or organization perspective, I work with somebody named Dave Jennings who talks about what he calls the pit of success, but it has some similarities, and especially for when you're sort of moving from a certain position into a new one, where all of a sudden you may have responsibilities you've never had before, or working in a field you haven't worked before, and you naturally your feeling of competence will drop, and then you'll come back out of it. You can't get from here to there by just sort of willing it to be. But my point is, he trains on that. So people have the language and start to talk about it and understand it. And so now it becomes part of the whole company that people talk about, oh, I'm in the pit of success now, and everybody knows what that means, as opposed to it being kind of something that has shame associated with it or something you shouldn't talk about. And so I think the one thing I would add is training, sort of making it a common language and a discussion topic.
I definitely think it's to build on what you were saying, it's if you see it, say something. I think that depending on where you are in your journey of your career, some of us who have been doing this a little longer than some other individuals didn't feel comfortable seeing or saying anything, and now we're in a position where we can actually acknowledge it. So earlier in the DEI conversation, they were talking about, if we need to be open and recognize it, right? So as a culture, I think no matter where you are in the organization, if you can try to be more open and bring it up and raise it up, and maybe it's not top down, maybe it's bottom up, or if we talk about the issue and we're talking about it more, everyone's going to say, oh, I actually feel that way, or I actually feel that way, or here's what I did, or here's what I did, right? So then you're not alone if you're in an organization, or if you're like me, if it didn't work in corporate America, you be the change. So as a female leader, I launched a company in order for me, it's not a pitch for me, but I launched a company so I could be the change and be seen in the way that I felt I needed to show up and be seen, right? But I think if we have to acknowledge, there's a lot we all are talking about, right, in corporate America or in small to medium-sized businesses, but we need to continue to have these conversations and make it open, because otherwise, especially for non-binary or, for other people, because they are also like, I'm being seen, or how that's being seen is changing, So I just think we have to try to feel like we can be open. And some leaders are going to say, like, we can't talk about all these things. We actually have to do work. Right? We can't spend all this time talking about these things. But I think that we do. I think that's what the new culture of where we are now is. Right? So accept it and let's have an open dialogue about it.
Yeah, I think those just two key things around shared language and conversation. And then I think something else too that I'm kind of hearing you say is that it's a work-life self-integration, and so that we're taking all of those things in everywhere that we are. And as employers, we have to understand that that's part of the deal now, is creating those spaces. So whether it's opportunities, whether you want to call them traditional lunch and learns, or different type of office hour setups, that has to be key. Thank you.
I was just going to add in a daily practice that we do at Next Day Animations, which, it takes time, and as a business owner, I think that takes money, but it's also so worth it. In our daily stand-ups, we run through our urgent projects of the day, just quick status updates. We also take time every single day in our stand-ups to give shout-outs to each other. So it's a way to recognize each other. It's a way for folks to feel just seen for the work that they're doing, connected, shouted out. Even if we give a similar shout out 2 days ago for a very similar thing, we're still taking this moment to appreciate and acknowledge and just see each other. And help foster a space where everybody feels seen and like they belong and they're valued.
I would also say, I mean, part of, and I just mostly want to name this, I mean, part of where we started off this conversation is that this conversation has really focused in on, high achieving women from the 70s, right? But I think also kind of bringing into a lot of professionals in general, you're sort of at different stages within your career, right? And so I think even for folks who are newer to their career, just having that space to say, here's how you're growing, like here's the project you worked on a month ago, and look at where you are now, and just sort of continuing to create that space for them to see their growth and pointing out their growth is also really important in helping sort of build that confidence. And then also on the other end, I think for those of us who are a little bit further into our careers, it's important for us to share those experiences that we are having or have had around imposter syndrome. So then that way we create sort of that culture of an open conversation. It's an open floor. Any questions, thoughts, feedback?
And if there's any online, we can hear them.
Kind of held the mic a few times today, so sorry about that, but things come to my brain on this conversation. To kind of build off of what you said and also what you said, I'm somebody who believes that the only way to learn how to be vulnerable, and that's kind of what we're talking about, right, is vulnerability, imposter syndrome. That's a very vulnerable topic. But the only way to learn how to be vulnerable is to experience vulnerability, right? Which is why I believe the next generation of leaders is really important for us to be vulnerable, to demonstrate to our team what vulnerability looks like. And I don't know about you, but when somebody else is vulnerable to me, I feel way safer to be vulnerable back. So I just think it's really important that we as leaders embrace that idea of communicating what's going on for us, to lead by example.
And I just want to add to that, I work with a group of students who I offer a mentoring program to them with women that are in professional fields that are non-traditional for them. And we had our orientation recently, and our topic was why it's important to tell your story. And it really is important to tell your story, because that's when the defenses come down. That's when you see the hard work that somebody got to be, they founded their own industry. And that's not the end, right? The stuff that happened way before that is so much more important. So I think if we're more vulnerable telling our stories, like you were saying, it's going to be a lot easier for the next generation coming forward to do the same thing.
Yeah, I just have a question. So I think this topic, imposter syndrome, I always wondered, so if someone kind of gives you a negative feedback, right, and they continue to give you one, I've noticed like your confidence level drops. Because I've always heard imposter syndrome is something how you feel, but I sometimes feel like others make you feel that way. Would you call that imposter syndrome, or is this something else?
No, I was absolutely going to agree with that. The premise of this article is turning that concept on its head. It's something that, yes, of course, there are two sides to it. There's what you feel as a result of what happens to you and what happens in your environment. But that's absolutely what this is trying to basically say. Let's redefine, instead of saying imposter syndrome is something every individual suffers from and has to heal themselves from. It's that environmentally, it's like gaslighting. It's the system perpetually telling you that you don't belong, that you don't fit. So this is trying to more or less reframe it in a way that it's not just the individual's responsibility. Caitlin and I were having a conversation in the car today about, what would be a good analogy for this. And instead of it being a cancer, she says, no, this is air pollution. It's around you. It's something that you breathe in. It's something that you coexist with. So it's can be hard to separate what you feel inside from what's happening to you externally. And that's one of the reasons why, we have the very first slide about what an individual can do is grounding in self-worth, because those kind of interactions do chip away at your self-worth. And as frustrating as it can be to have that responsibility just pushed back on you, you will only benefit in the long run for finding a way to ground in that. And the three of us are not up here saying, yes, we've won, we've done it. We're on that journey very much too. So it's a hard thing.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked a little bit about, or that I shared with you two when we were first talking about this, is I recently, within the last couple of months, had an experience where I was in a room very much similar to one of the photos that we saw, and the topic was around diversity, interestingly enough, and this individual kind of kept not even trying to listen to anything that I was saying, right? And so I shared this with another colleague, and the colleague said to me, well, I think you might have imposter syndrome. I think what's happening is that you think you're not good enough, so you didn't voice your opinion enough times. And so that was a place where I felt like someone was using this term to gaslight me and tell me that my experience is not valid. And so I actually had to go back to a text that I had sent to a friend after that, because I was like, I need to just write this out, because I can't believe this is happening. I had to go back to something that I had documented to say, no, this happened how I remember it happening. And so I think to your comment, and to add on to what you're saying, one of the cool things about doing things like the success journaling and some of the other things that we shared is that you do have an ongoing record. So if you're getting constantly negative feedback, but you can go back and take a look and see, well, this is what's happening. If you have an organization, you're around a team that does provide constructive feedback as well as positive feedback, right? You can go back and take a look and see, here's what other people are also saying about my work and what I'm bringing to the table. And that can help balance it out. And then maybe that's when you go to another step, which is to say, are these my people, right? Is this the culture and the space that I want to be in for my personal growth? And make a decision from there. So I do sometimes feel like with some of these terms, we have to be, I'm a big person in terms of like, just having a little bit of a list of, of stuff, right? Because then you're able to go back and take a look and say, this is how this thing is impacting me. This is what this environment is doing to my mental and well-being, and making a decision from there. And then it can be a little bit difficult then for you to get gaslit if you know kind of what's happening.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say one thing that we talk about this all the time at work. One thing that kind of I guide people to look at is the style of individual that you're working with. If you know the style is different than what your style is, then you have to not take every comment, to your heart, and just work through it, because it could just be the style of that individual. So just understanding the style of the other party is very helpful. That's another tip I wanted to share.
Sorry, Sorry, can I just add one quick thing? So this actually goes into having more equitable review systems. But if you have an outline of clearly what the deliverables are and expectations, then that should be the basis for any kind of feedback. To even add on to your piece around the style, if you're talking about peer reviews and project reviews, if there's an outline of what that looks like, same with even interviews, right? Then it helps address and mitigate the biases that may come in and impact that perception.
And I just wanted to acknowledge, okay, imposter syndrome, exclusion, it's kind of a bummer topic, right? It's like, the times we felt vulnerable, this, not fun to go there. But doing this, having these conversations and showing up, this is the transformative work that is going to help create more inclusive spaces in the future so that folks don't have to experience this, right, to the same degree. So I just want to thank everybody for coming. And the goal of this is not just to have individuals feel more empowered, but it's to create these cultures where everybody feels like they walk in the room and they belong and they can contribute and they can show up fully themselves. So just by showing up today and participating in this conversation, we are doing the work. It's meta, but this is the work that needs to be done. And I just want to thank both of you so much for coming to present with us and everybody for showing up and participating.
If anyone needs a pep talk, see Caitlin.
Yes.
She's your gal.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.